Sarah Martinez wiped down the bar counter for the third time that evening, her eyes constantly drifting toward the corner booth where he sat. Marco had been coming to her restaurant for 2 weeks now, always ordering the same whiskey and always leaving generous tips that made her fellow waitresses jealous. Tonight felt different, though. The way he smiled when she brought his drink. The way his dark eyes seemed to see right through her carefully built walls. "You're staring again," whispered Jenny, the other waitress, as she passed by with a tray of drinks. Sarah blushed and focused on polishing glasses. But she couldn't shake the magnetic pull she felt toward the mysterious man who claimed to work in construction. The evening crowd was thinning out when Marco finally approached the bar. His expensive suit seemed out of place for someone who supposedly worked with his hands all day. But Sarah had learned not to judge. Maybe he was a contractor, she reasoned, someone who met with clients. Sarah, right? His voice was smooth with just a hint of an accent she couldn't quite place. "I've been wanting to ask you something for days now." Her heart hammered against her ribs. At 25, she had been through enough disappointments to be cautious about men, especially ones who seemed too good to be true. But there was something about Marco that made her feel safe, protected even. "What's that?" she asked, setting down the glass she had been cleaning for far too long. "Would you like to get dinner tomorrow? Somewhere that isn't here? Where you're not working and I'm not sitting alone in that booth wondering if I'm bothering you?" Sarah looked around the nearly empty restaurant. Her boss, Mr. Chun, was in the back office doing paperwork. Jenny was wiping down tables and stealing curious glances their way. Everything felt normal, ordinary, except for the way this man made her pulse race. "I don't usually date customers," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew she was going to say yes. There was something about Marco that drew her in like a moth to flame. "I won't be a customer tomorrow night," he replied with a grin that made her knees weak. "Just a man who wants to take a beautiful woman to dinner." The next evening, Sarah changed outfits 3 times before settling on a simple, black dress that made her feel confident without being too formal. Marco had suggested an Italian restaurant across town, somewhere she had never been but had heard good things about. When she arrived, he was already waiting outside, looking impossibly handsome in dark jeans and a crisp white shirt. The restaurant was small and intimate, with dim lighting and the kind of atmosphere that made whispered conversations feel natural. "You look stunning," Marco said as he held the door open for her. The hostess seemed to know him, greeting him by name and leading them to a corner table that felt secluded from the other diners. Over dinner, Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Marco was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions about her dreams of opening her own restaurant someday, her family back in Texas, her struggles to make ends meet in the city. He shared stories too, though they were vague mentions of business deals, family obligations, the challenges of working in a field where trust was everything. "What kind of construction do you do exactly?" Sarah asked over dessert, genuinely curious about this man who seemed to have expensive taste for someone in manual labor. Marco paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Specialized projects," he said finally. "Buildings that require particular attention to detail. Security considerations, that sort of thing." It made sense, Sarah thought. There were probably wealthy clients who needed custom work, people who valued discretion and quality over cost. That would explain the nice clothes. The way he carried himself with quiet confidence. As they walked to her car after dinner, Marco caught her hand. His touch was gentle but firm, and when he turned to face her under the streetlight, Sarah felt the rest of the world fade away. "I had a wonderful time tonight," she said. "Meaning every word, so did I?" His thumb traced across her knuckles. "Sarah, I want to be honest with you about something." Her stomach tightened. Here it comes, she thought. The revelation that he was married or moving away or somehow unavailable. There was always something with the good ones. "I don't usually do this," Marco continued. "Getting involved with someone like you. Someone so ... Someone so what?" "Good," he said simply. "You're good, Sarah, pure, and my life, my work, it's complicated in ways that might be hard for you to understand." Sarah studied his face in the amber glow of the streetlight. There was something vulnerable in his expression, something that made her want to reach out and smooth away whatever worry lines creased his forehead. "Everyone's life is complicated," she said. "I'm not looking for perfect, Marco. I'm just looking for real." When he kissed her goodnight, soft and tender against her apartment building's front steps, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerously close to falling in love. 3 weeks of dating Marco felt like living in a beautiful dream that Sarah was afraid to wake up from. He picked her up after work in different cars, always expensive but never flashy. Sometimes it was a sleek black sedan, other times a silver BM. When she asked about it, he explained that his construction company had a fleet of vehicles for different projects. "Must be some construction company," Jenny teased one evening as they closed up the restaurant together. "That man treats you like royalty." It was true. Marco brought her flowers on random Tuesday afternoons, took her to shows she mentioned wanting to see, and listened to her talk about her dreams with the kind of attention that made her feel like the most important person in the world. But there were things about him that puzzled her, like the way his phone always seemed to be ringing and how he would step away to take calls in hushed tones, or how he never seemed to talk about specific projects, just vague mentions of deadlines and difficult clients. And then there was the night. She saw him talking to two men outside her building. Sarah had been coming home from grocery shopping when she spotted Marco's car parked across the street. Through her apartment window, she watched as he stood between two large men in expensive coats. Their conversation looked intense, serious. One of the men handed Marco a thick envelope, and even from her distance, Sarah could see the respectful way they treated him, almost deferential. When Marco called her 20 minutes later, his voice was perfectly normal. "Hey, beautiful, how was your day?" "Good," she said, looking out her window to find the street empty. "Are you nearby? I thought I saw your car earlier." "Just finished up a meeting with some clients," he said smoothly. "Want me to come up? I could cook you dinner." That was another thing about Marco that surprised her. He moved around her tiny kitchen like he belonged there, preparing elaborate meals that would have impressed the chefs at high-end restaurants. His knife skills were professional, his timing perfect, and he always seemed to know exactly which spices to use. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Sarah asked one evening as she watched him prepare what he called a simple pasta dish that looked like something from a five-star restaurant. "My grandmother," Marco said, not looking up from the pan. "She believed that any man worth his salt should be able to feed the woman he loves." The word loves hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had used it, and Sarah felt her heart skip several beats. "Do you?" she asked quietly. "Love me, I mean." Marco turned off the heat and faced her. In the soft light of her kitchen, he looked younger somehow, less guarded than usual. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you, Sarah Martinez." Which is exactly why this is so complicated. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed. Marco glanced at it, and his expression changed instantly, becoming hard and focused. "I have to take this," he said, already moving toward her small balcony. Sarah tried not to listen, but through the thin glass door she caught fragments of his conversation. Words like shipment and territory and send a message. His tone was different too, authoritative in a way that made her stomach twist with unease. When he came back inside, Marco's smile seemed forced. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked. "Just work stuff. You know how it is with demanding clients." But Sarah was beginning to suspect she didn't know how it was at all. That night, after Marco left, she found herself staring at the business card he had given her weeks ago. Rossini Construction, it read, with just a phone number below his name. The next day, during her lunch break, Sarah did something she had never done before in any relationship. She Googled Rossini Construction. Nothing came up. No website, no reviews, no business listings. For a company that supposedly handled high-end projects, Rossini Construction seemed to have no digital footprint whatsoever. Sarah tried different searches, adding the city name, looking for permits, checking contractor licensing databases. Still nothing. It was as if the company didn't exist. That evening, Marco seemed different when he picked her up from work. More alert, checking mirrors more often, taking a route to the restaurant that seemed unnecessarily complicated. "Is everything all right?" Sarah asked as they sat down for dinner. "You seem tense." Marco reached across the table and took her hand. "There are some things happening at work right now. Nothing for you to worry about, but I might need to travel for a few days." "Where?" "Chicago. There's a project there that needs my personal attention." Sarah nodded, but something cold was settling in her stomach. The way he said it, the careful phrasing, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers when he talked about work. It all felt like lies wrapped in half-truths. "Marco," she said slowly, "what do you really do for a living?" For just a moment, his carefully composed mask slipped. Sarah saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. Not fear of her, but fear for her. "I build things," he said finally. "I solve problems for people who need things handled quietly and efficiently. And sometimes that means dealing with situations that most people wouldn't understand." It wasn't really an answer, but the way he said it made Sarah realize she might not want to know the real answer. Not yet. The night Marco was supposed to leave for Chicago, Sarah couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, though she couldn't put her finger on exactly what. He had kissed her goodbye that afternoon with unusual intensity, holding her close and whispering that he would call her every day. But it was now past midnight, and her phone hadn't rung once. Sarah was making herself chamomile tea when she heard shouting from the street below. Through her window she could see a crowd gathering around the corner where Tony's Deli usually stayed open late. Curious and unable to sleep anyway, she threw on a jacket and went downstairs. "What happened?" she asked Mrs. Kim, her elderly neighbor who was standing at the edge of the crowd. "Someone got hurt," Mrs. Kim whispered. "They're saying it was some kind of fight, but the police haven't said much." Sarah pushed closer, her heart beginning to race for reasons she couldn't explain. Through the gaps between people, she could see paramedics loading someone into an ambulance. The person was conscious, sitting up, but there was blood on their white shirt. Blood on a white shirt that looked exactly like the one Marco had been wearing when he kissed her goodbye. "Excuse me," Sarah called to one of the police officers. "The person who was hurt, was his name Marco?" The officer looked at her with tired eyes. "You know him? He's my boyfriend. Is he okay? What happened?" "He's stable. Got roughed up pretty good, but he'll live. You should probably get to the hospital if you want to see him." During the taxi ride to the hospital, Sarah's mind was spinning. Marco was supposed to be on a plane to Chicago. What was he doing at Tony's Deli at midnight? And who would want to hurt him badly enough to send him to the emergency room? She found Marco in a bed in the area, looking pale but alert. His left eye was swollen shut, and there were bandages on his knuckles. When he saw her, his good eye filled with something that looked like panic. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I live 2 blocks away, Marco. I saw the ambulance. What happened?" "Why aren't you in Chicago?" Marco closed his eyes and was quiet for a long moment. When he opened them again, Sarah saw resignation there. "My flight was delayed," he said, which she immediately knew was a lie. "I was getting a late dinner when some guys jumped me." "Wrong place, wrong time. Marco, please, I'm not stupid." "Construction. Workers don't usually get jumped by multiple attackers. And they definitely don't fight back well enough to send their attackers running, which is what the officer told me happened." A nurse came in to check on Marco before he could respond, giving Sarah a few minutes to study his injuries more closely. These weren't the wounds of someone who had been mugged. His knuckles were torn up like he had been hitting things or people. There was a cut on his jaw that looked precise, like it came from something sharp rather than a fist. "The doctor wants to keep you overnight for observation," the nurse told Marco. "You probably have a mild concussion." After the nurse left, Sarah pulled her chair closer to Marco's bed. "I need you to tell me the truth. About tonight, about your job, about everything." "Sarah, there are things about my life that you're better off not knowing." "That's not your decision to make." Her voice was sharper than she intended, but fear was making her angry. "Someone tried to hurt you tonight, badly, and you're lying to me about why. Do you think I'm just going to pretend that's normal?" Marco stared at the ceiling for a long time. Finally he spoke, and his voice was so quiet Sarah had to lean forward to hear him. I don't work in construction, Sarah. I work for people who solve problems that can't be solved through normal channels. Business disputes, territory issues, situations where someone needs to send a message. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. What kind of messages? The kind that sometimes require people to get hurt. She sat back in her chair, trying to process what he was telling her. Are you saying you're some kind of criminal? I'm saying I work for people who operate outside the law when the law isn't enough to protect their interests. The Mafia. The word came out as barely a whisper. Marco's silence was answer enough. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. I need some air. In the hallway outside Marco's room, she leaned against the wall and tried to make sense of everything. The expensive cars, the mysterious phone calls, the way he carried himself with quiet authority, the men who treated him with respect. It all made a horrible kind of sense now. She thought about the envelope she had seen pass between Marco and those men outside her building. She thought about his knife skills, his ability to stay calm under pressure, the way he always seemed to be watching for threats, even in the most innocent situations. When she went back into the room, Marco was watching the door like he had been waiting for her to run. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because I was hoping I could keep you separate from that part of my life. Because you're good, Sarah, and clean, and everything that my world isn't. And tonight? What was tonight really about? Marco's jaw tightened. Someone decided to send their own message. About territory, about respect. They picked the wrong night and the wrong target. Are you safe? Are we safe? I can handle myself, and I would never let anything happen to you. But Sarah, if you want to walk away, I'll understand. This is what my life looks like? It's always going to look like this. Sarah stared at this man she thought she knew, this man she had fallen in love with, trying to reconcile the gentle person who cooked her dinner with someone who worked for the mob. I need time to think, she said finally. Sarah spent 3 days avoiding Marco's calls and texts. She went to work, came home, and tried to pretend that her world hadn't been turned completely upside down. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw his battered face in that hospital bed, heard his quiet admission about who he really was. Jenny noticed her distraction immediately. Trouble in paradise? She asked during their Thursday evening shift. Something like that, Sarah muttered, dropping silverware as she tried to set a table. Want to talk about it? You look like you haven't slept in days. Sarah almost laughed. How could she explain that the man she was falling in love with had just confessed to being involved with organized crime? That every romantic gesture, every sweet moment had been shadowed by a life she never could have imagined? It's complicated, she said, which was the understatement of the century. That night, Sarah was walking home from work when she noticed the car following her. It was a dark SUV that had been behind her for 3 blocks, moving slowly, matching her pace. Fear shot through her like ice water. She ducked into a 24-hour convenience store and pretended to shop while watching the street through the window. The SUV was parked across the street, engine running. Through the tinted windows, she could make out at least 2 figures. Sarah's hands shook as she called Marco. He answered on the first ring. Sarah, are you okay? Someone's following me, she whispered into the phone, moving toward the back of the store. There's a black SUV outside the convenience store on 5th and Main. I'm scared, Marco. Stay exactly where you are. Don't go outside. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming. Should I call the police? No, just wait for me. Marco arrived in less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sarah watched from the store window as his silver BMW pulled up next to the SUV. What happened next made her stomach drop. Marco got out of his car and walked directly to the SUV. The driver's window rolled down, and Sarah could see him having what appeared to be a calm conversation with whoever was inside. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a brief exchange that ended with the SUV driving away. When Marco came into the store, his face was grim. Are you hurt? He asked, his hands gentle as he checked her face, her arms, like he was looking for injuries. I'm fine, just scared. Who were they, Marco? What did they want? Let me take you home. We'll talk there. In her apartment, Marco made her tea while she curled up on her couch, still shaking slightly from adrenaline. When he sat down beside her, Sarah could see the careful way he was choosing his words. "The people who hurt me the other night, they wanted to make sure I got their message clearly," he said finally. "By following me, by showing me that they know about you, that they know you matter to me." Sarah felt sick. "Are they going to hurt me?" "No." Marco's voice was absolutely certain. "I made sure of that tonight." "How can you be sure?" Marco looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw him making some kind of decision. "Because I told them that if anything happens to you, anything at all, there will be consequences they're not prepared to deal with." "What kind of consequences?" The kind that start wars between families." The weight of what he was saying settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just dating someone involved with the mob. She had somehow become a piece on a chessboard. She didn't understand, in a game where the stakes were life and death. "I can't live like this," she said quietly. "I know. People following me, threatening me because of who I'm dating. This isn't the life I want, Marco. I know that too." Sarah looked at him, this man who had become everything to her in just a few short weeks. "Then what do we do?" Marco was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. "There are two options. I can arrange for you to disappear. New identity, new city, enough money to start over somewhere safe. You'd never see me again, but you'd be free of all of this." Sarah's heart clenched. "What's the other option?" "You stay, and you accept that your life will never be normal. That there will always be risks, always be things you can't know, places you can't go. That the man you love does things you might not be able to live with. Is there a third option?" "Where you walk away from all of this." Marco's laugh was bitter. "You don't just walk away from families like mine, Sarah. The only way out is in a box." They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of impossible choices hanging between them. Sarah thought about the life she had been building, her dreams of opening her own restaurant, the simple happiness she had found in Marco's arms. All of it seemed fragile now, balanced on the edge of violence and secrets. "If I stay," she said finally, "if I choose this life with you, what happens next? You learn how to be careful. You learn which questions not to ask, which places to avoid, which people to trust. And you learn to live with the fact that the man who loves you more than anything in the world is capable of things that would terrify you." "Have you killed people, Marco?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Marco's silence stretched on so long that Sarah thought he might not answer at all. "Yes," he said finally, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, some last innocent piece of her heart that had been holding on to the hope that this could all be some misunderstanding. "I need you to leave," she whispered. "I need to think about this alone." Marco stood up slowly, and Sarah could see the effort it took for him to walk toward her door. "Sarah," he said with his hand on the doorknob, "whatever you decide, no. That falling in love with you was the best and worst thing that ever happened to me." After he left, Sarah sat in her quiet apartment and cried for the loss of the life she thought she was going to have. Sarah didn't hear from Marco for a week. She went through the motions of normal life, serving tables and making small talk with customers, but everything felt hollow and strange. It was like living in a world where all the colors had been drained out. Jenny tried to cheer her up with girls' nights and ice cream, but Sarah couldn't explain why she felt like she was mourning someone who was still alive. How could she tell her best friend that she was grieving the loss of a relationship with a man who had admitted to killing people? On Thursday evening, a woman Sarah had never seen before came into the restaurant. She was elegant in an understated way, with graying hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and clothes that whispered expensive rather than shouted it. She asked for a table in Sarah's section and ordered only coffee. "You're Sarah Martinez," the woman said when Sarah brought her cup. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Do we know each other?" "Not exactly. My name is Elena Rossini. I'm Marco's aunt." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. She looked around the restaurant, suddenly conscious of how exposed she felt. How many exits there were, whether anyone was watching them. "Please sit," Elena said gently. "I'm not here to threaten you." Quite the opposite, actually. Against her better judgment, Sarah slid into the seat across from Elena. Up close, she could see the family resemblance. The same dark eyes, the same way of holding herself that suggested quiet strength. "Marco is my brother's son," Elena began. "He's been like my own child since his parents died when he was 15. And in all the years I've known him, I've never seen him the way he's been this past week." "What do you mean?" "Miserable, distracted, like a man who's lost something precious and doesn't know how to get it back." Sarah stared into her coffee cup. "He told me what he does. What you all do. And what did you think when you learned the truth?" "I thought I was in love with someone who didn't exist." Elena smiled sadly. "The man who cooks for you, who brings you flowers, who looks at you like you hung the stars in the sky. That man is very real, Sarah. The fact that he also does other things doesn't make the love any less genuine. He's killed people. Yes, to protect his family. To honor obligations, to maintain order in a world that operates by different rules than yours. But never for pleasure, never without cause." Sarah looked up at this woman who spoke about violence like it was just another part of life. "How do you live with it? Knowing what the people you love are capable of?" "Because I also know what they're capable of when they love someone. Marco would burn down the world to keep you safe." "Sarah, the question is whether you can love him knowing what he's willing to do for you. It's not that simple, isn't it?" Elena leaned forward slightly. "You love him. He loves you. Everything else is just details. Details that could get me killed. Details that could also keep you safer than you've ever been in your life. Do you think there's anyone in this city who would dare to hurt Marco Rossini's woman?" Sarah had never heard Marco's full name before. The way Elena said it, like it carried weight, made something cold settle in her stomach. "Who is he exactly?" "In your family, I mean." Elena studied her for a long moment. "He's my brother's heir. When Antonio retires, Marco will take over the family's operations." The coffee shop seemed to tilt around Sarah. She had known Marco was involved with the mob, but she had imagined him as some kind of foot soldier, not someone important enough to inherit an empire. "He didn't tell you," Elena observed. "Of course he didn't. He was hoping to keep you away from that part of his life. Is that even possible?" "No, not if you're going to build a real life together. The woman who marries Marco will be a part of this world whether she wants to be or not." Marriage. The word hung between them like a challenge. Sarah hadn't even decided if she could date Marco, let alone marry him. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because I've watched my nephew struggle his whole life to balance duty with happiness. And because I think you deserve to make this choice with all the information, not just the parts Marco thinks you can handle." Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "If you decide you want to see him again, call this number. If you decide you want to disappear, call it anyway. Either way, we'll make sure you're protected." After Elena left, Sarah sat alone in the restaurant long after her shift ended. Mr. Chun eventually came out to ask if she was feeling all right, and Sarah realized she had been staring at Elena's business card for almost an hour. That night, Sarah found herself doing something she hadn't done since she was a child. She made a list of pros and cons, like her mother had taught her when she was trying to decide between colleges. Cons: he's a criminal. People want to hurt him. Being with him puts me in danger. I'll never have a normal life. He's killed people. His family will never accept me. I'll always be looking over my shoulder. Pros: I love him. He loves me. I've never felt safer than when I'm in his arms. I've never felt more alive than when I'm with him. He makes me laugh. He sees me, really sees who I am. He would protect me with his life when she was done. The con list was longer, but the pro list felt heavier. Sarah picked up her phone 3 times that night and put it down again. What was she supposed to say? That she was willing to overlook murder for love? That she could live with being married to a man whose business was violence? But when she thought about never seeing Marco again, never feeling his arms around her, never hearing him laugh at her terrible jokes. The thought was unbearable. At 3 in the morning, Sarah finally admitted the truth to herself. She was going to call him. She was going to choose love over safety, over sense, over everything her rational mind was screaming at her, because sometimes the heart wants what it wants, even when what it wants might destroy you. Sarah called the number Elena had given her at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. A man's voice answered, polite but cautious. "This is Sarah Martinez," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Elena Rossini told me to call this number." "Of course, Miss Martinez. Mr. Rossini has been expecting your call. He'll pick you up at noon." "Wait, I didn't say I wanted to see him. I just called the number." "With respect, miss, people only call this number for one reason." At noon exactly, Marco pulled up outside her apartment building in a car she had never seen before, a classic black Mustang that looked like it had been lovingly restored. When Sarah climbed into the passenger seat, the first thing that struck her was how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost weight. "You look terrible," she said, and immediately wished she could take it back. "I've had better weeks," Marco replied, pulling away from the curb. "I wasn't sure you would call. I wasn't sure either." They drove in silence through parts of the city Sarah had never seen, winding up into hills where the houses grew larger and farther apart. Eventually, Marco turned through an iron gate that opened automatically, and Sarah found herself staring at a mansion that looked like something from a movie. "This is where you live?" "Family home," Marco said simply. 3 generations of Rossinis have lived here." Inside, the house was warm and inviting despite its size. Sarah could smell something delicious cooking, and there were fresh flowers in every room. Family photos lined the hallways, showing decades of birthdays, weddings, and holidays. Marco led her to a sun-filled kitchen where Elena was stirring something on the stove. She looked up when they entered, and her smile was genuinely warm. "Sarah, I'm so glad you came." "Elena told you she came to see me," Sarah said to Marco, who nodded. "I asked her to. I thought maybe hearing it from someone else might help you understand that this isn't just my world. It's a family with people who care about each other." Over lunch, Sarah met Marco's uncle Antonio, the man who currently ran the family business. He was nothing like what she expected from a mob boss. He was soft-spoken and gentle, asking about her work and her family with genuine interest. He talked about his grandchildren, showed her pictures of his garden, and treated her like an honored guest rather than a potential security risk. "Marco tells me you want to open a restaurant someday," Antonio said over dessert. "It's just a dream," Sarah replied. "I'm nowhere near having the capital to start something like that." "Dreams are important," Elena said. "They're what separate existing from truly living." After lunch, Marco walked Sarah through the gardens behind the house. They were beautiful and peaceful, with stone pathways winding between flower beds and a small fountain in the center. "This is where I come to think," Marco said as they sat on a bench near the fountain. "When I was a kid, after my parents died, I would hide out here for hours. Marco, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay, if I stay. If I choose this life with you, will you always tell me the truth? Even when you think I can't handle it?" Marco was quiet for a long moment. "There are things about my work that I'll never be able to share with you. Not because I don't trust you, but because knowing certain things would put you in danger. But about us, about our life together, about anything that affects you directly, yes, I'll always tell you the truth. And if I ask you to change, to leave this life, I can't, Sarah. This isn't just my job, it's my family. My responsibility. I can't walk away from that any more than you could walk away from your own family if they needed you." Sarah nodded. She had expected that answer, but she needed to hear him say it. "There's something else I need to know. Elena said you're going to inherit all of this someday. What does that mean for me, for us?" "It means that if we get married, you'll be the wife of the head of this family. You'll have protection, respect, resources most people can't imagine. But you'll also have responsibilities. There will be events you'll need to attend, people you'll need to charm, situations where you'll need to be strong even when you're terrified. And children? If we have children, they'll grow up knowing that family loyalty is everything, that our word is our bond, and that sometimes the world requires difficult choices. But they'll also grow up safe, loved, and with every opportunity in the world. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine that life. Raising children in a world where violence was always a possibility, where their father's work was something that could never be fully discussed, but also a world where family meant everything, where loyalty was absolute, where love was fierce and protective. I'm scared, Marco. I know. I'm scared too. You're scared? Terrified. Of losing you. Of not being able to protect you. Of you waking up one day and realizing you can't live with what I am? Sarah opened her eyes and looked at this man who had turned her world upside down. In the afternoon sunlight, surrounded by the garden his grandmother had planted, he looked younger than his years. Vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I love you, she said simply. I love you too. I don't know if I can do this. Live this life, be part of this world. But I know I can't live without you. Marco took her hands in his, and Sarah could feel the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. We'll figure it out together, he said. One day at a time? As they walked back toward the house, Sarah realized that she had made her choice. It wasn't a rational choice or even a smart one, but it was hers. Marco, she said as they reached the kitchen door, when you said I kissed the wrong man that first night, you were right. But maybe sometimes kissing the wrong man turns out to be exactly the right thing to do. That evening, as they sat on her couch in her tiny apartment, Sarah felt the weight of her decision settling around them like a blanket. She was choosing love over safety, passion over prudence, a dangerous future over a safe past. But when Marco pulled her close and kissed her forehead, when she felt his heart beating steady and strong against her cheek, Sarah knew she was exactly where she belonged, even if where she belonged was more complicated than she had ever imagined possible.